Picture of me a couple of years ago. I do a little look a little different than this. My hair is probably a little bit whiter than that. I will make a video welcoming you to the class in the future, but I just thought you might want to see what you're talking what I'm talking about when I talk about myself. There you go. Okay, let's find something else. What else? Okay, so we need to talk about what we're going to do in order, how we need to pass this class, how you need to pass this class, and what you need to do that. So here's the syllabus. Does it have the right days? No, yes, it does. Okay. Um, Here's the syllabus for this class. There are two Psych 240 classes. And the textbooks are different, I'm assuming. I don't think Dr. Russ is using the same textbook that I am, um, but I'm sure you'll get similar information from the two textbooks. This is me, as you just saw my picture. This is where I live. I live in Lost Nation, Iowa. There's my telephone number if you need to get a hold of me. I will have Zoom hours every Monday through Thursday for about 2 hours every day. This is the Zoom number right here. Um, Monday it will be in the morning, 8 to 10. And Thursday it will be in the morning, 8 to 10. On Tuesdays and Wednesdays it'll be 3 to 5 in the afternoon. This is all Mountain Standard Time. So I'm actually on Central Time, so this is I will be an hour later when you call. So if you call it, I don't know, 10 o'clock, it'll actually be 11 o'clock my time. Or if you call it 5 o'clock, it'll be 6 o'clock my time. So there you go. There you go. Okay. Where's the textbook? Did I have it here? Yeah, there it is. Okay. This is the textbook. This name is actually wrong. It should be Clegg-Kraynok. There we go. Here, let's take that out of there. There you go. It's Clegg-Kraynok is the lead author, and Lifespan Development: A Chronological Approach, fourth edition. I'm not exactly sure if this how accurate that ISBN number is. Maybe for the instructor's copy. But you can order it in any configuration you want. You may be having trouble getting it from Follett. They are notorious for not having textbooks or well, we won't go into that. They've had a bad reputation over the last couple of years, especially since COVID. But you can order this online. You can get an ebook. I have a note on my book that says you can get it for as cheap as $40, an ebook for $40. Not bad. Okay, so how do we pass the class? What do we need to do to pass the class? Okay, here we go. So we're going to have weekly quizzes. They're actually chapter quizzes, but sometimes I cover 2 chapters in a week. So we'll have weekly quizzes. There will be 15 questions on each quiz. They're not time quizzes. You can do anything you want. You can open up your PowerPoints. You can have your book open. I don't care. It doesn't really matter. I don't really use quizzes as tests. I use quizzes as reviews for the chapter. This is what I want you to know. This is 15 things that I want you to know about the chapter. So that's it's not really. Let's call it a quiz just to make the administration happy. But what I really grade are the discussion questions. I'm looking for your thoughts on the discussion from the discussion questions. Hopefully they're thought provoking. They're supposed to be thought provoking anyway. There you go. Total of 450 points. There's also a library paper. Don't forget about the library paper. So what topic should you use in the library paper? Anything that's in the textbook, you can write a paper about. Anything that you find fascinating. If you find childbirth fascinating, you can write about that. If you find uh, lowering sperm counts in the United States, and I'll talk about that actually in the third lecture. Um, then write about that. You can write about anything you want. As it turns out, of course, let me do a little bragging. I have 5 degrees, 5 degrees, 3 advanced degrees. I have degrees in, I have an associate degree in medical laboratory technology. I worked in medicine for 30 years. I have a bachelor's degree in English. Um, so English literature and grammar is one of the things that I do. Uh, I'm trained to correct your grammar. I have a master's degree in political science, which they won't let me use. Uh, and that's okay because I have enough psych classes to teach. And then I have a master's degree in psychology and a PhD in psychology. So there you go, a little bit of bragging there. So my focus is very broad. I'm very curious about a lot of different things. Medicine, political science, psychology, of course. Uh, Oh, and I read a lot. I read a lot of literature. So there you go. Anyway, so you need 450 points. You get these quizzes, and I will count them toward your final grade. I will grade your discussion questions. I'm looking for your thoughts. Hopefully, you're not going to be able to find the answer to the discussion questions in the textbook. It's not in there uh, because I want you to think. I'm trying to get you to think about lifespan development. I'm trying to get you to think about human growth and development. Um, I, I I want you to ponder the topics that we're talking about. Okay, and I think that's about all. Yeah, this just explains what you need to do. I don't know if I have the right dates up there. I think I do. Okay, so your paper is due in April. Don't not something that you need to worry about in January, certainly. And okay. The one thing, this is between you and I. Don't everybody knows about it, but don't don't broadcast the fact. I don't count off for late work, so if you fall behind a little bit behind, and this doesn't have okay, well, it's okay. If you fall a little bit behind and you don't post for a couple of weeks, don't bother um, emailing me and saying, "Oh, look, my horse was sick and I had to spend a couple of weeks out in the barn. I wasn't able to post. That's okay. That's fine. Don't worry about it. Just turn it in whenever you get it done. I don't look at dates anyway. The problem comes at the end of the semester when everybody's catching up. Yeah, I get blasted at the end of the semester, and I am teaching six different classes. So this gets a little bit intense toward the end of the semester. So if you can, stay up with things and post in a timely manner, that I will appreciate a lot, especially at the end of the semester when I'm finishing things up. Um, I will. With your discussions, I will potentially discuss what it is you're talking about. The great thing about the discussion questions, since they are supposed to be thought provoking, and as long as you put thought into your posting, um, I feel that that's what I'm trying to get at. There are no right or wrong answers usually in my discussion questions. I do not grade it for right or wrong. I am looking for original thought. So where does AI come in there? Well, AI shouldn't be in there at all because AI comes from, it comes from like Google. Google kind of takes a compendium of ideas and puts them together, and that's what AI is, and it'll give you that answer. So you got to be really careful because a lot of that AI stuff comes out of South Asia. South Asia, when I'm talking about South Asia, I'm talking about India, Bangladesh, and potentially they have different ideas. The subcontinent of India is a primarily Hindu country, so it doesn't really have it's not really indigenous, and it doesn't have indigenous ideas. So that's one of the things you need to be careful about is posting something from AI. I do not appreciate it. And as I highlighted here, it is cheating as far as I'm concerned. If you give me a paper that is an AI generated paper, I won't grade it. Okay? So I'm looking for your thoughts. I want, I'm trying to educate you, not find out what the internet is talking about. And I do teach a class in social media and gaming. So I'm pretty much, I don't know. It's really tough, and it's hard to talk about AI because if you do turn in something that is AI, it's very difficult to determine if it is AI. Artificial intelligence, of course. But if it looks like it's AI, I might ask you whether it is or not. Yeah. Anyway, I'm looking for thoughts. It's going to be a problem that we have in the future with everybody asking Siri about this and Siri about that. So, or what is the other one? Elisa? No, it's not it. I don't know. Anyway, I don't use that stuff because I'm a very curious person with a lot of degrees in a lot of different areas. Okay, the other question you might ask is, how old is this guy? My goodness, he keeps talking about Vietnam, he talks about this, he talks about the other, and the answer is, I am 75 years old. Wilson Aronilth, and I are old pals. I've been teaching at Dene College for 10 years, and the only guy that's older than me is Wilson, my buddy Wilson. And Avery and I are pretty good buddies too, so there you go. Uh, Old people, what's wrong with those guys? Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with chapter 1. This is chapter 1, studying lifespan development. And you get to see my family. And I think I'm in here somewhere. All right. All right, chapter 1, studying lifespan development. It starts with conception, when the sperm meets the ova. Initially, it becomes a zygote right out of the as the sperm enters the ova. It becomes a zygote, and then it develops into an embryo, and this is what an embryo looks like. And then eventually, of course, it becomes a fetus. And that's nobody in my family. We certainly didn't take a picture of an embryo from my family. Okay, this is my grandson, this is my daughter, and that's the father of this little guy right here. Birth to 1 month, it's also referred to as a neonate. That's another time. We're talking about lifespan development, and that is one of the times. Birth to 1 month, they are neonates. These two are not together, by the way. He lives in Florida. She lives here in Clinton, Iowa, and with the little guy. And I'll show you more pictures of the little guy. And you can look at his face and see if he changes over time. There he is. 1 month to 1 year, they're an infant. There he is again, 1 year to 2 years. You can see how blonde his hair is. That's pretty blonde hair. We were worried that he'd look just like my son. My son is uh, my daughter's arch enemy, and she she was cringing with the thought that the toddler would look just like her brother. And there he is. He was actually out with his Uncle Chris, so he said he he wanted a hat, and this was at McDonald's. If he had they had gone to Burger King, then he would have gotten a crown, but they didn't have one, so he decided to use his Happy Meal box as a hat, and he needed lots of ketchup for his French fries. Now he doesn't even eat ketchup, as strange as that is. That's a preschooler, 2 to 6 years old. Here he is running in the Santa Run as a polar bear, 6 to 12 years old. And I'm going to show you this is his this year picture. So as you can see, his hair has turned darker, and he's no longer a blonde like his Uncle Chris. And he kind of looks like his dad. There you go. Anyway, there you go. That's Reese. His name's Reese, R-H-Y-S. It's a Welsh name. Adolescent. That's him as an adolescent. He's 12 years old now. And he's playing basketball, and that's the reason my office hours are at such strange times. The basketball schedule just came out, and he has a game next Thursday, a week from tonight. Yeah, a week from tonight, and they're in the afternoon, so 7th grade basketball. He's a little guy. He's not that tall. He's a soccer player too, but he's kind of short and stocky. Well, you can see he's short and stocky. Anyway, well, we'll see what happens. Young adult, 20 to 40 years old. This is my nephew, DJ, David Justin. I don't know. He's actually kind of tall, and he was a bodybuilder for a while. Now he's a cyclist. David Justin. I guess we all have big ears, don't we? Oh, wait a minute. We're going to see how big my ears are in just a second. There we are. There's me. 40 to 60. This is a college reunion I went back to. And this is a guy I ran in the mile relay with. That's Tom Bambry. Anyway, that's me when I was younger. And we're going to see me now. There we go. 40 to 80. I was in my 70s in this picture. In my early 70s. I'm at 75 now. And the old, wait a minute. This is young old adult. What a silly name, young old. And that's old. That's Clint Eastwood. He's older than 80 years old. Anyway, there you go. Okay, old people. Human development can take many forms. 3 major domains of development include physical development, mental development or cognitive development, and psychosocial development. Psychosocial development gets really interesting. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about is the fact that the internet has really changed this whole psychosocial structure. For the longest time, people evolved through their culture. Now we almost have a world culture or an internet culture or a general culture. This all started with television when they started. When television started back in the 1950s, and I'm that old, I was born in 1949. The television culture changed everything. Before, the only people that you came in contact with were the individuals around you, and the transportation wasn't that good, so you only came in contact with people that were just like you, around, the people in your area. If you lived in New York, maybe the diversity was a lot greater. But if you lived in rural Ohio or Indiana or Kentucky or Arizona, the only people you came in contact with were the people that lived around you. So psychosocial development has really evolved over the last 75 years since television, and now with the internet, everybody's TikToking and whatnot. TikTok has become very controversial. YouTube, I will put this on YouTube for you to see. And people are seeing things that they've never been able to see before. So the psychosocial development is massive because people in Africa are seeing exactly the same thing that you're looking at. You know, somebody that likes cats in Kenya gets to see the same cat videos that you're looking at. The domain of physical development or biological change includes the noticeable changes of the body over time, such as growth, movement, and changes in perception. And this gets really kind of fascinating. I was reading an article about bodybuilding in India for women. Women are bodybuilding, and of course they're pretty buff. But this is something that never happened before. Women in India didn't do that. It's a very male-dominated. The Hindu religion is very male-dominated. The Indian culture is very male-dominated, and women never conceived that they could do something like that. But of course, with the whole psychosocial thing, the whole idea coming in from the West potentially. People have started changing the way that they think of themselves, as interesting as that is. And as we grow, of course, our biology, everybody grows, everybody ages. The people that I grew up with, a lot of them aren't with us anymore. 75 is pretty old. I just looked this up the other day. The white male, I'm Caucasian. White male life expectancy in the United States is 74.76 years, and I'm 75, so I'm on the downward slope. Everything from here on out is gravy. When I was born, it's really kind of interesting. When I was born, my life expectancy was 59. And now that I'm 75, my life expectancy, I've gone beyond my life expectancy, which is okay, which is pretty good. My dad died at 90, my mother died at 99. So, you know, I have a lot to look forward to. And I get to keep teaching as well. I get to teach this year anyway. Certainly for the spring semester, they're not going to, we'll see what happens. Cognitive development involves changes in the methods and styles of thinking, language ability and language use, the strategies for remembering and recalling information. Cognitive development involves all psychological processes by which individuals learn and think about their environment. And so what I am trying to do is get you to think. I'm trying to allow your brain to accumulate new information that you wouldn't have otherwise. Now you can look all this stuff up on Siri will tell you all about this stuff. Siri, tell me about cognitive development. You know, Siri can tell you that information, but I want you to know about this stuff. I want you to expand your mind. That's one of my fears anyway, is that the human brain will stop evolving. It will stop gaining more information. Because just because AI has that information doesn't mean that it's stuck somewhere in your head. That you can call it forward. And if you're someplace where you don't have internet service, you're going to be as dumb as a post. That's worrisome. Psychosocial development is primarily concerned with personality, social knowledge and skills, and emotions. Psychosocial development especially concerns relations with other people, such as family, peers, classmates, and coworkers. It also includes one's sense of self and personal identity. And this is getting to be really kind of interesting because there are we have more children who are being homeschooled now than we ever have in the past. So what does that mean? Well, they're not getting the psychosocial development for somebody who goes to high school, somebody who goes to junior high school, um, somebody who interacts with other individuals. They're only interacting with a select group of individuals, potentially only their family. Whereas, as I grew up, I went to public school, of course, and so not only did I develop my personality as it might have been developed anyway, but I also developed it interacting with all my cohorts, all the people in my class. And this, of course, may change in the future because people will stop doing this. And this is how you see yourself, and this is how you interact with other individuals. Maybe you'll start acting like people on TikTok or whatever it is. I'm sure there will be something that replaces TikTok. And my grandson, geez, he's 12 years old and he watches videos all the time. You have to just about pull him from the, have to threaten him to get him off of his iPhone. Doesn't have an iPhone. He just has some kind of a telephone. This is Urie Bronfenbrenner, this guy right here. Urie Bronfenbrenner developed the ecological theory of development. For some reason, it's in your textbook as in Chapter 1. This theory sees that the child as the center of an ever-expanding system of influence that helps to create the person that the child will become. So in the middle, in the microsystem, is the child. Along with the child in the microsystem is his parents. His parents and siblings are in the middle because these are the individuals that he interacts with on a continual basis. Of course, they have given him their genetics, and so his way of thinking is not only genetic, but it's also environmental. And that will create the individual that he is or will become. The next ring of influence in the concentric circle is the mesosystem. Meso just means middle. This ring is closest to the child because the child has direct contact with it. It's school, friends, and school, his friends, and his extended family. And as I was saying, the number of children that are being homeschooled is really expanding. So maybe his circle of friends is not as extensive as it would have been had he gone to a school, or she, whichever the case may be. And of course, extended family when you visit aunts and uncles. Now, this is more intense for individuals living on the Navajo Nation because of your clan system. Your extended family is more extensive. When I was growing up, I had relatives on my mother's side, from my mother's side, from my father's side, but we didn't interact that much, not nearly as much as you do on the Navajo Nation. The next ring of influence in the concentric circle is the exosystem. Exo meaning outer, of course. This ring influences the child but may not make contact with the child. Such things as the parents' place of employment, the government and their social policies, the parents and their social network may or may not make contact with the child. And of course, this is I thought this was funny. And of course, look at that old computer. My job is to be a chicken. And this has to do with the government. So my dad was a banker, and I didn't really come in contact with the people he came in contact with every day. So this would be the exosystem, how they influenced him, and then he influenced me. And of course, social policies, things have changed over the years. Now we have a new president, and it looks like he wants to change a lot of different things. We'll see how that works out. We've been pretty much at the same level for the last 75 years. So we'll see what Trump has in store for us. Looking forward to complaining, I guess. Anyway, that's the exosystem. The outer ring of the system is the macro system, macro meaning large. This circle influences the child, but is mostly abstract influences on the individual. Such things as historical events, culture, and ethnic group influence the child, but is not something that the child has any influence over. You cannot change your culture. You come from wherever you come from. This is my brother. In 2005, he was stationed uh, in Afghanistan. He was a National Guard, and they were deployed to Afghanistan. And there he is on a convoy, and this is his Afghan driver wearing green in that environment. Anyway, so that had a huge impact on him and the way that he thinks. That's part of the macro system. If you're indigenous, this of course you guys don't powwow, but I was working up north in Montana, and the powwows were huge up there. Just they had powwows through the year, and then there were people that were on the powwow circuit. They would go to, there's 7 reservations in Montana, and they would go from one to the other, dancing and showing off their own culture, showing off their own ability to dance. This is a grass dance, by the way. So, interesting stuff. One of the major arguments in psychology and biology are genes more important in dictating behavior than the environment within which someone grows up. So it's nature versus nurture. That's the debate. This is huge. This is gigantic. This was the argument. Really kind of interesting. When I first started in psychology back in the 70s, the 1970s, the argument was, should women work outside the home? Should men allow their women to work outside the home? That was the major debate. And of course, there was a lot of nature versus nurture. The idea was that nurture was more important, and that's why women needed to stay home and take care of children. This became very poignant for for me, not really me. It was an individual I was had interacted with back in the 70s. She wanted to have babies. She wanted to have babies really bad. So through the years, she tried to get pregnant, couldn't get tried to get pregnant, couldn't do it. So she had IVF done. When she finally had the resources to do IVF, she was in her early 40s, and the doctors told her that if she wanted to have children, that she had to use somebody else's eggs. She shouldn't use her own eggs. The probability of something happening with those individuals was too great. So that's what she did. She used somebody else's eggs, and her husband impregnated the eggs. It was all done test tube wise. So biologically, the children are not hers. She carried them to term and had them, um, but but they weren't her biologically. They weren't her children. But of course, over the next, they're in their 20s now, and one's a doctor and one's a bodybuilder, and she had a little boy and a little girl. The boy is a doctor and the girl is a bodybuilder. As interesting, and a first grade teacher. As interesting as all that is. So the question comes up: is it nature versus nurture? And of course, this changes over time as there's more interacting with the environment. Environment becomes more important. So at this point, the last time we talk about this, we change the textbooks from time to time as we talk about this. The last thing I heard on a symposium was that nurture is 80% of the individual is nurture, and only 20% is nature. So if we look at her example, the children don't look anything like her, but because she's the one that raised them, and she was one of those involved mothers, they are hers. I mean, they are more her than they would be if the whole nature part, the whole gene structure thing, isn't really that important as far as she's concerned, because these are her children. And the girl, the girl, I call her a girl. She's in her middle 20s. She's a first grade teacher and a bodybuilder, and they just moved back home. They were living in Florida, and they just moved back home. Really kind of fascinating to see how this has evolved over time, and how this has changed over time. Continuity is the continuous, smooth progression of developmental phenomenon across a lifespan, such as friendships that start at Head Start and last into adulthood. That's known as continuity. There is continuity as we look at lifespan development. Lifespan is multi-directional. The lifespan not only involves growth, but decline as well. Aspects of life may continue to expand, your vocabulary expands, while others slowly decline over time, like your reaction time. And I'm more here than I am here. And yes, I just showed you pictures of a female developing. I will show you pictures of a male developing in just a second. And I think it's important for you to know what people look like, whether they have clothes on or not. Plasticity, humans have the ability to adapt to different circumstances. Our fates as humans are not cast in stone. We can mess ourselves up. We can do things to make ourselves live longer. We have the ability to optimize time or truncate it, and this is these are two older people that are on the beach and walking around and laughing. She's laughing anyway. I don't know if he is. He probably got his feet wet. This is a mock-up of a woman who smokes and a woman who doesn't. The same woman if she didn't smoke. And as you can see, she ages far more rapidly if she smokes than if she didn't smoke. That's the idea. Anyway, and that's known as plasticity. You can do whatever you want. You can smoke. You can take drugs. You can drink yourself into oblivion, and it all comes back to haunt you in the end. You will when you reach my age, you realize, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't have done that. I have been aware of this. I've taught lifespan development for about 40 years, and has it been that long? Wait a minute, let me think. 91 is the first year I taught college. So that's what, 9, and this is 25, so it's 34 years. Been teaching for 34 years. Anyway, I've known this. I've been an athlete all my life, so I'm doing okay. And I didn't smoke, and I didn't drink, and I certainly didn't take drugs. But my friends who did are dead. I'm sorry. That's just the way it works. Historical context, we all live in a time, and each era in time is marked by the history of that time. While your parents lived most post-Vietnam and 25-cent gallons of gas, you are living through 9/11, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and $4 gallons of gas. Maybe it's not $4 where you are. It's I filled up my truck this afternoon, and I paid 3.09 a gallon. That's in Iowa, of course. This is my brother again. That's him. He's got his pistol on his leg, carrying his, I'm not sure what they call that weapon now. It was an M16 during Vietnam. That was my era, Vietnam. I joined the military in 71 and I got out in 83. My dad was in World War II, so that would have been my dad. There you go. When I was in the military, we didn't have Humvees, and we also didn't have, as interesting as this is, we didn't have camouflage. BDUs, what we call battle dress uniforms. Uh, they weren't camouflage. They were just one solid color, and that was during Vietnam. So if you look at uh, pictures of people in Vietnam, they didn't have camouflage uniforms on. They were jungle fatigues, is what they were. Anyway, that's historical context. We won't talk about the military anymore. And hopefully we won't have to talk about gasoline because, wow, yeah, it has been, price of gas has been as high as $4. And you guys are way out there and kind of in the boonies. You got to drive a long way to get from one thing to the other. That's why I like the online classes. You don't have to travel any place. You can look at them anytime you want. If you're a 3 o'clock in the morning person for viewing your PowerPoints and listening to my lectures, go ahead, do it. 3 o'clock in the morning. You don't have to drive to say Lee or wherever. Multiple causation. There are any number of things that allow us to turn out the way that we do. Biological forces, psychological forces, sociocultural forces, life cycle forces. This is a picture of two individuals that grew up very similar, as weird as that is. This guy's family was a little bit better off. This guy not so much. Uh, they were both picked on in school. They both dropped out of school at one point. This one joined the Marines. This guy joined a group of computer people. And they developed a way of, of doing things on the computer. Uh, anyway, this is Bill Gates. He's the developer of Microsoft. And this is Lee Harvey Oswald. He was the assassin of John F. Kennedy. And if you look at their histories, they got in trouble when they were in junior high school. They got picked on when they were in junior high school. This one, it made him mad. This guy, it made him resolved. They both skipped school a lot, and for Bill Gates, it worked out for him. But for Lee Harvey Oswald, it made him so angry that he decided that he would kill the president. Developmental psychologists are interested in how individuals change over time. For this reason, it is important that they select research designs that will inform them about the change. And this is how this works. This is Kristen Stewart. And that's how she changed over time. This is her as a child. This is her today. This is the lady that married Priscilla Presley. That's who it is. And that's when she married him. She was a teenager. And this is her today. Her daughter actually died last year, which was a bit of a surprise. Died of heart problems. You would think somebody with that much money would be able to forego all that, but it didn't work. Here we go, Madonna. This is her when she first started, and this is her today. And Bruce Willis. There he is. Of course, Bruce Willis is suffering from a form of Alzheimer's disease at this point, so he can't talk. George Bush, this is him when his presidency started. This is what he looked like at the end. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mr. Olympia. That's him in his 20s. This is him in his 70s. Not bad for a 70-year-old, but certainly not that. We change over time. We're going to talk about the scientific method. We're talking about research and what we find over time. Lifespan psychology bases its knowledge on systematic study, research, and investigation of continuity and change in human beings. How are things constant over time, and how things aren't continuous? How things are abrupt, like your knees going out. That's fairly abrupt. These observations use the scientific method, a procedure that ensures objective observations and interpretations of observations. One of the things that we're going to notice is that everybody's not the same. As a matter of fact, nobody's the same. We're all snowflakes, as well. That has developed a negative connotation in the conservative sphere, but the reality is we're all different, and just because you react one way to something doesn't mean that I'm going to react the same way. A good example is heroin. Opiates or opioids. Potentially, if you use them, it makes you constipated, you get stoned, it takes away your pain. I am one of 5 to 10% of the world's population who doesn't react to opiates and opioids. It doesn't do anything to me. It's like swallowing. It would be like swallowing a Tic Tac. And as an athlete, sometimes I've injured myself, and they have given me painkillers to take care of the pain, and it didn't work. When they gave me OxyContin or hydrocodone, didn't work. So I took something else. And the something else I took was actually Tylenol. Tylenol worked, and OxyContin didn't. As weird as that sounds. So we're all different. But the point is that we're all different. Caffeine doesn't do anything to me either. What else doesn't do anything? Oh, ibuprofen. I react negatively to ibuprofen. Okay. So, we're all biochemically different. I have a brother. Okay. I said that caffeine, I don't react to caffeine. Caffeine doesn't do anything to me. I can drink all the caffeine I want, and I'm not going to have a reaction. I'm not going to get the shakes. It's not going to keep me awake. But I have a brother that if he drinks caffeine, he kind of blacks out. He doesn't know what's happening. He gets really hyper. And it was really kind of interesting because my dad was like me, and my mom was like my brother. If she drank any caffeine at all, she got the shakes. And I told you she lived to be 99 years old. When she was older, and my dad was still alive, my dad would drink coffee like by the bucket load, and he'd leave some in a cup. And my mother, who was raised during the Depression, was taught not to waste anything, so she would drink the rest of his coffee if he left a little bit in his cup. And she was and sometimes she would have heart palpitations because of that that little sip she took of caffeine. Anyway, okay, lifespan method. So one of the things that we do in the scientific method is we see something, we want to look into it, we question it, we develop hypotheses, we create an experiment. From the experiment, from our observation, the question that we asked, the hypothesis that we determined, We've done an experiment, and then we develop a conclusion from what we saw, and then we publish the results. That's the scientific method. The scientific method begins with questions. Sometimes these questions refer to previous studies. Other times they refer to issues important to society. But they are questions that seek to generate new answers that can help society, hopefully. The research question should generate a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a statement that expresses the research question precisely. After terms of the question are clarified, the hypothesis is usually stated as an assertion that can be tested, and that's what a hypothesis is. It is a question that states an assertion that can be tested. This is tough. This is really tough because sometimes you guys want to do research on something that's happening on the reservation, but you can't come up with a hypothesis that states an assertion that can be tested. If it can't be tested, if you can't figure out a way to test it, it's just speculation. It's not a hypothesis. After phrasing a research question, I remember I've been here for 10 years, and I've taught research methods. So I've had a lot of people trying to come up with hypotheses. After phrasing a research question as a hypothesis, researchers conduct an actual study about it. The choice of method usually depends on the type of research question being asked, as well as convenience and efficiency, ethics, and scientific appropriateness. Okay, I'm going to tell you about my own research. I was living on the Fort Belknap Reservation up in Montana. I was teaching up there, and I decided that I would test resilience, and I wanted to test resilience in the indigenous population in that area. So I came up with a hypothesis that using an instrument that measures resilience, I will find that the indigenous population in that area is resilient. And I wanted to find out what factors contributed to that resiliency. I looked at education, I looked at age, I looked at gender, I looked at culture, and I looked at level of trauma that they had been through in their lives. And those were the five things I was looking at. Those were my independent variables. My dependent variable was resilience. And I had an instrument to measure resilience. I also had an instrument to measure trauma. I had an instrument to measure level of culture. Level of culture. Remember, these guys powwow all the time. Well, some of them do anyway. Okay, so that was my research. Okay, we're going to talk about my research now. As far as the scientific method is concerned, I've got my hypothesis was that my population would show resilience, and these were my independent variables: trauma, culture, age, gender, and education were my five. I had a friend that thought that I needed to use spirituality, but on the Fort Belknap Reservation, there was a huge controversy with traditionalism, with Catholicism, with evangelical religious movement. So I decided that was too controversial to use. It wouldn't really mean a whole lot. What I really wanted to know was how traditional are you, and whether that contributes to your resilience. Anyway, so I didn't do spirituality. After conducting the study, the psychologists have responsibility to report its outcomes to others. The report should include reasonable interpretations or conclusions based on the results and enough detail so that other psychologists can replicate the study and test the conclusions. And I did. I published my dissertation. This is my dissertation. Okay, so you might wonder what my results were. So my independent variable I'm sorry, my dependent variable was resilience. My five independent variables were trauma, culture, education, gender, and age. Those are my five. Okay, so I found out that the population was resilient, of course. They had survived, just like the Dene people have survived over time, through boarding schools and through whatever they had gone through. They had all survived, and they were very resilient. And I had all five of these. I was looking at all five of these factors, and but there was only one of them that had anything to do with resilience. Age didn't have anything to do with resilience. Education didn't have anything to do with resilience. Gender didn't have anything to do with resilience. Everyone else who had done studies on resilience had found that women were more resilient than men. I didn't find that. I didn't find that in my study. And trauma didn't have anything to do with resilience. No matter how much trauma you'd been through, you were still resilient. The one thing that affected resilience in my study was culture. The more culture you had, the stronger your resilience was. As interesting as that is. The other interesting thing is that if we look at other populations, the level of trauma reduces the amount of resilience. But in my population, people that I was looking at, it didn't. And that's really a curiosity because when you look at all the studies on resilience, the only group that trauma does not affect is indigenous people. It's American Indians. And there have been studies from the Southwest. One was done on the Dene people. One was done on one of the Pueblo populations. That's what they discovered. No matter how much trauma you'd been through, your resilience level was not affected. And that's only in your population, in the indigenous population. Okay, so let's talk about designing an experiment. The most basic experimental design involves two groups, the experimental group and the control group. Now, of course, I didn't have a control. That would be silly. I used surveys. But when I was working in medicine, I worked with a doctor that liked to do research. And he would always have a control group and an experimental group. And he was working with otitis media. Otitis media is inner ear infections for children. It was at a children's clinic in Vienna, Virginia. And so he would give them antibiotics, and it would either be the antibiotic he was testing, or it would be a placebo. And he wanted to see if he was doing experiments using a control group and an experimental group. The two groups are designed to be the same except for one difference, experimental manipulation. And what he was doing was he was giving them either the medication or the placebo. If they didn't get better in a week, then he gave them a broad spectrum antibiotic that took care of their inner ear infection. He certainly didn't want to blow out anybody's eardrum with an ear infection. And we were looking at the type of bacteria. He was puncturing the eardrum and getting a sample of the pus behind the eardrum. And we were trying to find out what kind of bacteria we were dealing with and everything. It was really kind of fascinating. The two groups are designed to be the same except for one difference. Of course, that's experimental manipulation. The experimental group gets the experimental manipulation, that is the treatment or the variable being tested, and the control group does not. And in this case, of course, he gave them a placebo. And actually, the placebo in this case was a painkiller. It was a mixture of aspirin and Tylenol. Tylenol and ibuprofen. Yeah, it was Tylenol and ibuprofen. You don't want to give kids aspirin. Well, yeah, we don't give kids aspirin anymore because of Reye's syndrome. Since experimental manipulation is the only difference between the experimental and control groups, we can be sure that the differences between the two are due to the experimental manipulation rather than chance. So what he discovered was that if he gave them the experimental antibiotic, it worked, and these people were cured. These children were cured. If he gave them the control, the placebo, it took care of their pain, but it didn't take care of their infection. And but a number of days later, he would give them the broad spectrum antibiotic. The independent variable is manipulated by the researcher. In my case, that was trauma, culture, level of culture, level of trauma. And I didn't really manipulate it. I just measured it. And it was different for everybody. And that's why it was an independent variable. Age, education, and gender. It is a variable presumed to cause a change in the other variables. And that's, of course, what I was hoping to find out about resilience. The dependent variable is the one measured by the researcher to see if changes depend on the level of the independent variable, and that was, in my case, it was resilience. Internal validity refers to making sure that nothing else besides the independent variable can affect the dependent variable. And of course, internal validity in a survey experiment is not easy because there are other factors that affect all of these things. This is accomplished by controlling all extraneous variables and by randomly assigning people to different experimental conditions. And of course, I was measuring everybody, and I couldn't control any extraneous variables. Internal validity, so my internal validity wasn't very strong. Internal validity is established by controlling all extraneous variables and by using random assignment to conditions. Now, one of the things that we have to remember is that in science, sometimes if we're dealing with gravity, if we're dealing with physics, if we're dealing with chemistry, we can control all these extraneous variables. But in psychology, you can't. Remember, everybody is a snowflake. Everybody is unique unto themselves. And we can't control everything. We can't control extraneous variables. We just can't do that because we can't tell people, I'm sorry, you can't, I don't want you to kiss your spouse anymore. This is an experiment. You can't do that. You can't eat bread for the next year because that's what we're measuring. You can't do that. So, and in a survey, we're looking at everybody anyway. Random sample, if possible, a random sample, but we're talking about scientific method. So we need to make it as close to the scientific method as we possibly can. If possible, a random sample should be used. A random sample is a subset of a larger population in which every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. Random samples are preferred because if the sample is large enough, we can be reasonably sure that the participating individuals are representative of the larger population. This means that the percentages of characteristics in the sample, the sex, ethnicity, socioeconomic level, and any other characteristics that might affect the results are close to those percentages in the larger population. Now, the larger population in my case was everybody on the reservation. But I wasn't allowed to do my research. I couldn't get permission to do my research on the reservation. So I did my research on the American Indians, the indigenous people that lived off the reservation. And so I had a limited number of individuals that I was dealing with. So my population became all those people that lived off the reservation, all those indigenous people that lived off the reservation. Now, of course, in Navajo County or Apache County, wherever you are, that would be a huge number of people. But this was Blaine County. This is Blaine County in Montana, where there was only, I don't know, 3,000 or 4,000 people. So I was actually able to identify the entire population of people, the American Indians that lived off the reservation. They either lived in Harlan, they lived in Chinook, or they lived in the farming community around the reservation. But they didn't live on the reservation. I wasn't allowed to use that population, as interesting or uninteresting as that is. So I was able to survey everybody. everybody that lived off the reservation who was indigenous. True experiments require the experimenter to manipulate an independent variable, and that can complicate many questions that psychologists might want to address. We categorize this type of research approach as a quasi-experimental and recognize that we cannot make cause and effect claims in these circumstances. So my experiment was not a true scientific experiment. It was a quasi-experiment. That's all we can do in psychology because we're dealing with um, the human brain. We're dealing with ideas. Experimenters are also limited by ethical constraints, and we can think of just tons of different ways that you cannot manipulate people like that. Reliability and validity are two important considerations that must be made with any type of data collection. Reliability refers to the ability to consistently produce a given result. In the context of psychological research, this would mean that any instruments or tools used to collect data do so in consistent, reproducible ways. Now, remember I told you I had an instrument for culture, I had an instrument for trauma, and I had an instrument to measure resilience. So what I had to do, I had to look at all the experiments that used the resilience survey that I used. I had to look at all the experiments that were done using the cultural instrument that I used. I had to look at all the experiments that used the trauma method measurement that I used. And I did. That's all in my dissertation where I listed them all and showed that there was a reliability in trauma and culture and in resilience. There are a number of different types of reliability. Inter-rater reliability, the degree to which two or more different observers agree on what has been observed. Internal consistency, the degree to which different items on a survey that measure the same thing correlate with one another. Test-retest reliability, the degree to which the outcomes of a particular measure remain consistent over multiple administrations. And one of the things I could have done, I could have tested them initially, and then I could have sent them a second survey to find out if the results were similar. But I didn't want to identify the individuals. I didn't, that wasn't what I was trying to do. What I was trying to do was get an initial look at resilience in that population. Unfortunately, being consistent on measurement does not necessarily mean that you have measured something correctly. This is where validity comes into play. Validity refers to the extent to which a given instrument or tool accurately measures what it's supposed to measure, and there are a number of ways in which validity can be expressed. Ecological validity, the degree to which research results generalize to real-world applications. Construct validity, the degree to which a given variable actually captures or measures what it is intended to measure. And then face validity, the degree to which a given variable seems valid on the surface. While any valid measure is reliable, the reverse is not necessarily true. And of course, as you can imagine, research that was done in the 1960s would probably not be valid in today's world. It just wouldn't be reproducible. Why? Because people have changed from the 1960s to the 2020s. Yeah, that was 60 years ago. Yeah, it's changed. One thing that's changed is telephones. In the 1960s, telephones were stuck on the wall. And you could only call people if you stood on beside the telephone, beside the wall, and talked on the telephone. Today, you carry around your telephone, and that has changed everything. It's changed everything completely. In the 1960s, you didn't worry about being connected with people because you couldn't. It was impossible. You had to be close to a telephone to be connected with people as continually as we are today. Now people won't go anywhere without their phone. You know, I talk to my grandson. He's got his phone with him all the time. He doesn't want to be, just in case he misses something. He doesn't want to miss something on. He doesn't have TikTok. He's got. He uses YouTube videos, but he doesn't want to miss anything. You know, fear of missing out. FMO. What if my car breaks down? You know, what did you do? What did you do in the 1960s if your car broke down? You fixed it yourself. Changed your own damn tire. Measurement, systematic observation. Systematic observation involves observing people or other animals and recording everything of interest that they do. Naturalistic observation is the observation of people or other creatures as they spontaneously behave in their real-life situation. Structured observation is the observation of people or other creatures in an artificial setting to elicit behavior, potentially in the laboratory. Naturalistic observation, you watch them. So if you want to see how people buy cabbage, you go to the produce aisle at Walmart and watch them eat, watch them buy cabbage. If this were an experiment that you wanted to control all the variables, you'd bring them into the lab and have a bunch of cabbages and have them, you know, squeeze them or do whatever they do with cabbages. I'm watching, trying to buy watermelon or tomatoes or something. Systematic observation, these are two famous experiments. This one was done by Bandura. And this is where we came up with the idea that when children see violence, they do it too. They are mimickers. And this is, of course, Jane Goodall with her chimpanzees. So these are two systematic observations. Experimental studies. An experiment is a systematic way of observing behavior where variables are manipulated so that an experimental variable can be observed. The manipulated variables are called independent variables, and as I told you about my own research, the independent variables were trauma, culture, age, gender, and education. And the measured variable is referred to as the dependent variable. In this case, I was trying to find out how resilient that population was. And if that might be interesting to you, my figures on resilience were the highest of any population except very, very old people. And I guess people in their 70s and 80s figure, hey man, I made it to 70 or 80. I must really be resilient. So they tend to score very, very high. But when we looked at other populations, we looked at studies in Tennessee, in Ohio, in Africa, in Germany. You know, what we found out was that indigenous people have a higher resilience level than all of those other individuals. Germans, you know, Dutch, Kenyans, Ohioans, people from Tennessee, volunteers, that's what the Tennessee people are called. Hoosiers, people from Indiana, that's where I'm from. Another method of accumulating data is to have people answer questions or record their thoughts. This can be done with surveys, which is what I did, or with diaries, having them write down. They did a really fascinating study with women. They couldn't figure out why when women are drunk, men get more abusive toward them. So they had women writing down how much they drank and whether men were nice to them or whether they were mean to them. And as it turned out, from these diaries, and they did several different experiments in several different areas, what they discovered was that for some reason it makes men angrier when women are drunk. And you can look into that. I mean, you can speculate as to why that happens, but we won't go into that right now. Physiological measures. Physiological measures are measurements of physiological activity using various forms of instrumentation, such as EEGs. EEG is electroencephalogram, where they're looking at the the electrical activity in the brain. A PET scan is positron emission tomography, is where we are looking at areas in the brain to see where the activity level is, and functional MRIs. And this is a PET scan, and this is a functional MRI. And as we can see, however they stimulated this individual, these are the areas of the brain that were activated. Actually, I think this one is he snorted cocaine. And this is the same thing. He snorted, this is him before, then he snorts cocaine, and as you can see, you get all this activity level all over his brain. Now, what is that supposed to tell you? Well, he started out thinking the same thing, and there was not a whole lot of activity going on in either of these situations. Then he snorts cocaine, and so what does this represent? This represents paranoia. That's what we're dealing with here. Paranoia. Once a researcher selects the method of testing, they must show that it is reliable and valid to be used on the population. Reliability refers to the test's ability to measure at the same level on a consistent basis. I've already told you this once. Why am I telling you twice? Because theoretically, if you tell somebody something 3 times, they remember it. Validity refers to the measurement actually measuring what they are supposed to measure. This is the way they train you in the military. In the military, they tell you what they're going to tell you. I'm going to tell you about the M16. Then they tell you about the M16. And in the end, they review all the information that they just told you. So what does that do? Well, if you hear it 3 times, what I tell you 3 times is true. That's something that was out of the hunting of the snark. What I tell you 3 times is true. What I tell you 3 times is you should remember. Research is generally done in a large number of participants to increase the acceptance of the results as generalizable to a larger population. The population is the total number of people who qualify for the research, and the sample is the number of people that you actually that are actually the research is done on. That is your sample. So in my case, I was talking about indigenous people of the Northern Plains. I was talking specifically about the Nakota and the Aani Nin, or also known as the Grovant, or the White Clay people. One is an Algonquian-speaking tribe, and the other is a Nakota-speaking tribe. Nakota is a Siouan language. So my sample was the people that I was able to get to take my survey. The population was the Fort Belknap Reservation. But as it turned out, my sample also included a group of Chippewa. There was, what was their name? Anyway, there was a group that came to the Fort Belknap Reservation. They were landless. They were a landless tribe. And they came to the area and they were adopted onto the reservation. They were allowed to live and to interact with the Nakota and the Grovant people. Little show. You can look them up if you like. It's just another. They were a group of Chippewa Cree. Actually, these guys were Chippewa. Stonechild. Stonechild is the name of the reservation. Is called. They were Chippewa Cree. They were actually from Canada, but these guys were from North Dakota. They got moved around, and federal government, there weren't enough of them for the federal government to negotiate with, so they became landless Indians. They went from pillar to post trying to find some place to live, couldn't find any place to live, and finally they were slowly adopted onto the Fort Belknap Reservation, but not onto the Chippewa Cree Reservation. Uh, Rocky Boy. Rocky Boy. Rocky Boy was actually the name of the chief of the Chippewa Cree. So the reservation is called Rocky Boy, and the college that is on the reservation is called Stone Child, because that was, Rocky Boy, Stone Child. It's, which one is it? What was he called? Well, of course, his name was Chippewa, or his name was in Chippewa Cree, and that's how it was translated. Could be translated as either one. So what are we talking about? Okay, so those are the three populations, or the three groups that I sampled. Little Show. Little Show was also the chief of this Chippewa group. Correlational studies. In a correlational study, a researcher investigates the relationship between variables. The results of a correlational study are normally measured by calculating a correlational coefficient, or plotting the relationship along an axis that runs from +1 to -1. So it encompasses 2. +1 is 1, and -1 is a second number. So you plot it along this continuum between +1 and -1, and that's your correlation coefficient. And that tells you how close it is to being true all the time. If it's true every time, that's +1. If it's never true anytime, it's -1. But usually, sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. So the closer to 0 it is, the more it's random. Okay? That's your correlation coefficient. Longitudinal studies involve observing and or testing the same individuals or groups at various times over their lifetimes. An example of a longitudinal study would be the Kauai longitudinal study by Werner and Smith. These two researchers began following at-risk babies born in Kauai in 1955. The research continues to this day. Now, the interesting thing is that my trauma measurement is the same trauma measurement that was used by Werner. Werner was Smith was actually a nurse who did most of the measurement, and Werner was the psychologist that developed the study. So the two of them came together and they started watching these kids born in Kauai. And I was actually communicating with Werner actually is the way she pronounces it, to use her trauma measurement. And she allowed me to do that. So that's a longitudinal study. So every 2 or 3 years, they will look at this same group of kids that were born in 1955. Of course, now they're older than that. How old are they now? They're 70 years old now. They were born in 1955. So they're still looking at these people. Werner has died. Both of these people have died. This is out of the University of California, Davis. Is where Werner was, and Werner was teaching out of there. Anyway, you can read the studies. I've got 3 of them. They write a book every 20 years or so. They write a book about what's going on with these kids. I call them kids. They're 70. I'm 75. They're my cohorts, but they're from Hawaii. But longitudinal studies such as Werner and Smith do have their problems. Because the individuals take the same test over time, the practice effect comes into play. So because they've taken exactly the same test, and you have to use the same questions because otherwise you are skewing your results. They get used to answering these questions this way. Is this the way I answered this last time? I don't remember. It is terribly expensive, and the researcher must be supported in their research. And in this case, of course, Werner was, and Smith became part of that whole thing. Both Werner and Smith have since died. Cross-sectional studies, this is what I did. I did a cross-sectional study. That's how I could use age as a criteria, as one of my independent variables. A cross-sectional study also measures people at different times of life, but instead of following the same people over time, in a cross-sectional study, people of different ages are measured at the same time. Cross-sectional studies tend to be affected by differences between age groups. This is referred to as the cohort effect, as people raised in the same era are likely to have similar ideas. So people from World War II who fought in World War II, those guys are mostly gone now. You know, your Navajo code talkers, I think there may be only one left. Anyway, people that are born and raised in the same era tend to have the same ideas. I'm a Vietnam era individual. I have the similar ideas to a lot of the people that were in Vietnam. And we're going to see the same thing with the soldiers that were deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, potentially. What other types of cohort effect is there? People that were hippies during the 1960s and 1970s. People that were punk in the 1980s and 1990s. Hip hop people. I'm not up with what's going on, so I can't. But you guys know this stuff. Individuals, we have influencers that potentially have all these followers. That's the cohort effect. And that is the end of the lecture. I had a good time. As I tell most of my students, I'm just here for a good time. So there you go. Anyway, okay. So I will talk to you again next week.